The lobby of Hartwell Medical Group went quiet the moment the security guard touched the old man's arm. He hadn't caused a scene. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd simply stood at the reception desk for 22 minutes, holding a manila envelope against his chest, wearing a coat that had seen too many Canadian winters and not enough dry cleaning. The woman beside him, his daughter, maybe 8 years old, missing one front tooth, clutching a stuffed moose with a ribbon around its neck, had been coloring quietly on a chair nearby until she looked up and saw the guard. "Papa," she said, just that. From the 4th floor, through the glass wall of her corner office, Catherine Osei watched. Her assistant, Trevor, appeared at her elbow with a tablet and a look that said he already knew what she was going to ask. Front desk flagged him 10 minutes ago. No appointment, wouldn't give a name. Just asked to speak with whoever's running the organization now. Catherine looked at the man again. His posture was straight despite the worn coat. His hand was on his daughter's shoulder, not gripping, just present, the way a parent's hand rests when they want a child to know they're still there. "Call Dr. Finch," she said. "Tell him I'll be at the board presentation in 15 minutes. She looked away from the window. "And tell reception to keep it professional." She didn't see the way the old man's jaw tightened when the guard said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside." She didn't hear the little girl ask, in a voice too small for the marble lobby around her, "Papa, are we in trouble?" The presentation on the 12th floor was already underway when Catherine arrived. Hartwell Medical Group's board of 11 sat around a curved table, most of them in the kind of suits that cost more than some people's monthly rent. At the head of the table, Raymond Bliss, COO, 15 years with the company, silver-haired and surgically polished, was mid-sentence. Third-quarter projections assuming the Crestbridge acquisition closes by November. We're looking at a 40% increase in outpatient capacity and significant cost consolidation across the Atlantic Division. He paused when Catherine sat down, giving her the practiced smile he reserved for moments when he wanted to look gracious. "Catherine, good of you to join us, Raymond." She opened her folder. "Walk me back to slide 4, the rural clinic contracts." A beat of silence. Bliss smiled again, a fraction thinner. "We were moving past those, I know. Walk me back anyway." Beside him, the CFO, a compact man named Gordon Shue, who communicated mostly through spreadsheets and strategic size, tapped his laptop. Slide 4 appeared. 14 rural clinics across northern Ontario and Manitoba. Community service contracts that Hartwell had held for 8 years. Contracts that were, according to the current line item, marked for restructuring upon Crestbridge integration. "Define restructuring," Catherine said. "Efficiency review," Bliss said smoothly. "Some of those clinics run at a loss. Crestbridge's model prioritizes. They run at a loss because they serve communities that can't pay premium rates. That was the point." Catherine set her pen down. Hartwell built those contracts because Thomas believed healthcare access wasn't a privilege, it was a promise. Bliss's smile didn't move. But something behind his eyes did. "Thomas has been gone for 4 years, Catherine. The market has evolved." She wanted to argue. She had 17 arguments ready. But her phone buzzed under the table. A text from Trevor. "Security situation escalating in lobby. Thought you should know." She stood. "Give me 10 minutes. We're in the middle of 10 minutes, Raymond." She took the elevator down, expecting a disgruntled contractor or a lost pharmaceutical rep. What she found made her stop at the base of the stairs. The man was still there, but now there were 2 security guards flanking him and a small crowd of Hartwell employees hanging back near the coffee station with their phones half-raised, recording. The little girl was pressed against her father's side, her stuffed moose held tight to her chest, eyes wide and wet. A nurse from the 2nd floor, Patricia, who had been with Hartwell since the building was built, stood between the guards and the man with her arms crossed and an expression that could have stopped traffic. "This is unnecessary," Patricia was saying. "He's not doing anything. Ma'am, he doesn't have clearance. He asked to speak with someone. That's not a crime." Catherine walked forward. The crowd parted. The guards straightened. The man looked up. He was older than he'd seemed from the 4th floor. Late 60s, maybe, with deep lines around his eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to wait without fidgeting. His hands were calm. His coat was clean but frayed at the collar. "I'm Catherine Osei, CEO. You asked to speak with someone in charge?" "Yes," his voice was measured. "I need to discuss some financial irregularities in Hartwell's northern contracts. It's time-sensitive. Then you'll need an appointment through proper channels. I tried, 3 weeks ago and twice before that. I was told external consultants require a board referral." "You're a consultant?" "Not exactly." Before she could ask what exactly, the elevator behind her opened, and Bliss stepped out with Gordon 2 steps behind. They must have followed her down. Bliss took one look at the scene, the old coat, the little girl, the employees recording, and made a sound that Catherine would not easily forget. Not a laugh. Not quite. More like the sound someone makes when they're deciding how to be contemptuous efficiently. This is what interrupted the board meeting. He walked closer. Catherine, the man clearly doesn't have business here. Let security do their job. I have more business here than you know, the man said quietly. Bliss ignored him. Sir, this is a private medical corporation. If you have a grievance, there's a public ombudsman process. The number's on our website. The little girl looked up at Bliss. We've been waiting a really long time. Bliss glanced at her the way some people glance at inconveniences, briefly, without softening. That's not our concern, sweetheart. Her name, the man said, is Nora. The quiet in his voice was worse than anger would have been. Catherine stepped between Bliss and the man. Raymond, go back upstairs. She turned to the security guards. Stand down. I'll handle this personally. Bliss didn't move immediately. He looked at the man one more time, that long, measuring look of someone deciding whether a thing is worth his attention, and apparently decided it wasn't. He turned and walked back toward the elevator. Gordon followed without a word. Catherine looked at the man. Conference room 3. You have 10 minutes. That's all I need to start. The conference room was small, meant for vendor negotiations and insurance adjusters. Catherine sat across from the man and his daughter, who immediately pulled a coloring book from her backpack and set to work on what appeared to be a very serious illustration of a Canadian goose. Talk, Catherine said. The man placed the manila envelope on the table. Your CFO has been approving payments to a medical supply company called Northbridge Solutions. 63 payments over 2 years. Total value, approximately $31 million. Catherine's expression didn't change. Go on. Northbridge Solutions is a shell corporation. The registered address is a mailbox on St. Clair Avenue in Toronto. The company has no employees, no inventory, no verifiable operations. The payments flow through 2 intermediate accounts and land in an offshore holding registered to a numbered company in the Cayman Islands. He opened the envelope and slid a sheaf of documents across the table. I have bank records, contract approvals, and the email chain where Gordon Shue authorized the vendor setup. Catherine picked up the first page. Her hands were steady, her mind was not. Where did you get this? I have sources inside the organization. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving right now. Across the table, Nora looked up from her coloring. Papa, the goose is supposed to be gray, not brown. Gray it is then. I only have brown, then the goose is having an unusual day. Nora considered this seriously and went back to coloring. Catherine looked at the documents, then at the man. You still haven't told me who you are. Does it matter? Yes. Because if this is real, I need to know whether I can trust the source. The man met her eyes. His were dark and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. You've been CEO for 3 years. In that time, have you ever felt like decisions were being made around you rather than with you? Like board approvals were happening faster than you could review them. Like certain budget lines were explained away before you could ask questions. Catherine said nothing. That's not a rhetorical question. I know. She set the documents down. What do you want from me? Look at what's in that envelope. Tonight alone. Don't tell Bliss. Don't tell Gordon. Don't tell anyone until you've read everything, and then you'll know what to do. He began gathering Nora's crayons back into their box. The little girl packed her coloring book with the careful efficiency of a child who has learned to be ready to move quickly. You still haven't told me your name, Catherine said. The man paused at the door. He looked at her for a long moment, not sizing her up exactly, but something more like taking her measure. Hartwell Medical Group, he said, was built on the idea that a hospital system could be profitable and still serve the people who couldn't afford to be profitable patients. The rural clinics, the northern contracts, the subsidized care partnerships, those weren't charity. They were the point. His voice was quiet. Someone in your building has spent 2 years stripping that apart, one fraudulent payment at a time. I'd like you to stop them. Then he and Nora walked out, and Catherine was alone with an envelope that felt heavier than paper should. She read through the night. By midnight, she'd confirmed 3 of the shell company registrations through public corporate records. By 2 in the morning, she'd found the email thread, forwarded by someone she didn't recognize, where Gordon had told an account manager to move the Northbridge approvals through before Q2 closes, don't flag it. By 4, she'd traced enough of the money to feel physically ill, $31 million. Over 2 years, hidden inside legitimate-looking vendor contracts that Gordon had personally approved without board review. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the Crestbridge acquisition. Buried in the contract documents, the ones Bliss had presented to the board as a straightforward merger, was a clause in Section 9, subsection 4, Operational restructuring. Crestbridge retained the right to terminate any non-revenue-generating community service program within 24 months of acquisition. No board approval required. The rural clinics, all 14 of them. Catherine sat in her office and stared at the ceiling and thought about 3 years of meetings where Bliss had told her that growth required hard choices. 3 years of being handed projections she'd trusted because the people handing them to her had more institutional history than she did. 3 years of a company that had drifted, quietly and expensively, away from the thing that had made it worth running. At 5 in the morning, she called the board chair. Eleanor Whitcomb was 73, had retired twice, and answered on the second ring as though she'd been expecting the call. Catherine. It's early. I know. I'm sorry. I need to tell you something. She told her everything. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, describe the man again. The one who gave you the documents. Catherine described him. The worn coat, the quiet voice, the little girl. Eleanor made a sound Catherine couldn't interpret. Did he tell you his name? No. Another silence. Then, Catherine, I'm getting in my car. Don't do anything until I'm there. And don't tell Raymond. I was going to confront. Don't. You don't understand the full picture yet. Eleanor's voice had gone very careful. The man you described, older, gray at the temples, dark eyes, quieter than you'd expect for someone making serious accusations. Yes, and the little girl. 8 years old, missing a front tooth? Yes, her name is Nora. Catherine went still. He told me. I know, Eleanor exhaled slowly, because I know who she is. Catherine, that man is James Hartwell. The name landed like something falling from a great height. James Hartwell, the founder. The man who had built Hartwell Medical Group from 2 clinics, and a conviction that rural Canadians deserved the same level of care as anyone in downtown Toronto. The man who had disappeared from public life 4 years ago after his wife's death, and whose whereabouts had been a subject of bored speculation ever since. That's impossible, Catherine said. James Hartwell is, raising his granddaughter alone and watching his life's work get dismantled from a distance. Eleanor's voice cracked, just slightly. He called me 6 months ago, told me something was wrong inside the organization. I believed him, but I didn't know how wrong. I should have pushed harder. A pause. I'll be there in an hour. Don't let them move forward on Crestbridge. The email went to the full board at 6:45 in the morning. Catherine had written it 4 times and deleted 3 versions before settling on language that was direct without being incendiary. Credible evidence of financial misconduct requiring immediate independent review before the Crestbridge vote proceeds. By 7, her phone had not stopped. Patricia, the nurse from the lobby, texted from the 2nd floor, "We saw your email, we're with you." At 8, she looked out her window and found 200 employees standing in the parking lot, not protesting, not chanting, just standing there in the early October cold, holding coffee cups, waiting. Some of them held handwritten signs, "Protect the Northern Clinics." Hartwell means community, and one, held by an older man in a maintenance uniform, that simply read, "We remember why we started Catherine," went downstairs. The cold hit her when she pushed through the front doors. Someone handed her a coffee. She shook her head. "Thank you for being here," she said. Her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. "I know you have questions. I don't have all the answers yet, but I can tell you that the board will not vote on any acquisition today. And I can tell you that I am not going to let this company forget what it was built to do." A woman near the front raised her hand. "My entire department got an email last week about restructuring. Are we losing our jobs? I don't know yet. But I promise you that no decision about this company's future will be made without a full understanding of what's actually happening inside it. And that starts today." Someone started clapping, then someone else, then the whole parking lot. Catherine went back inside before she cried in front of 200 people. Bliss was waiting for her in the lobby. He looked like a man who had prepared something to say and intended to say it regardless of circumstances. "This is a mistake, Catherine. Good morning, Raymond. You've accused our CFO of fraud based on documents from an anonymous source. Do you understand what that does to the acquisition timeline, to investor confidence, to our standing with Crestbridge? I understand it perfectly. Then you understand that you may have just cost this organization the most significant growth opportunity in its history." Catherine stopped walking. She turned to face him. "Raymond, who is James Hartwell?" Something shifted behind his eyes, not fear exactly, but its cousin, the founder. He stepped back 4 years ago after his wife. Where is he now? Nobody knows. He chose to withdraw from. He was in our lobby yesterday. Bliss went very still. "He stood at the reception desk for 22 minutes, Catherine said. "And while he waited, you came downstairs and you looked at him and you decided he wasn't worth your time. And then he gave me 31 million reasons to think you knew exactly who he was." Bliss's jaw tightened. Whatever he told you is documented, verified against public records I checked myself, and will be in front of Eleanor Whitcomb and the full board in 40 minutes. She stepped past him. I suggest you call a lawyer, Raymond. A good one. The board meeting was the longest 2 hours of Catherine's professional life. James arrived at 9:15, Nora's hand in his, a second manila envelope under his arm. When he walked into the boardroom, the silence was the kind that happens when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that they have fundamentally misread a situation. Bliss recovered first. James. His voice was careful, controlled. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is. James settled Nora in a chair against the wall with a paperback book and a package of crackers. Then he sat down across from the board and opened his envelope. I've been gathering documentation for 6 months, he said, without preamble. What you're looking at is a systematic pattern of fraudulent vendor payments authorized by your CFO with the knowledge and cooperation of your COO. Over 2 years, $31 million, routed through shell companies and recovered in offshore accounts. He looked at Gordon directly. The Northbridge account terminal is registered to your brother-in-law, Gordon. His name is on the incorporation documents. Gordon's face went the color of old paper. That is a lie, Bliss said. It's a matter of public record in the Cayman Islands corporate registry. James turned a page. I'll give you the filing number. The board erupted. Eleanor banged her hand on the table. Order. Everyone quiet. In the corner, Nora looked up from her book, decided the grown-ups were being loud again for reasons that didn't require her attention, and went back to reading. The questioning took an hour. James answered everything. When Bliss accused him of fabricating evidence out of grief and instability, a long practiced speech about a founder who had never recovered from his wife's death and was now sabotaging a company he'd abandoned. James waited until he finished and then said simply, I didn't abandon Hartwell. I stayed away because Helen asked me to let her legacy survive without my shadow over it. She believed the people she hired could carry it. She was right about most of them. He glanced at Bliss. Not all. Helen has been gone for 4 years, Bliss said. You don't get to use her as don't. The single word from James was so quiet that it stopped Bliss mid-sentence. You don't get to tell me what I'm allowed to say about my wife. Nora looked up again. Papa. I'm all right, sweetheart. She studied him for a moment with the particular seriousness of children who have learned to read adults accurately. Then she went back to her book. Eleanor called the vote 30 minutes later. 9 in favor of suspending Bliss and Gordon pending investigation. 2 abstentions. The Crestbridge acquisition was tabled indefinitely. Bliss stood when the vote was read. He looked at James across the table with an expression that held fury and something else. Something close to genuine bewilderment, as though he had genuinely believed that the version of the company he'd been building was the right one. You've destroyed a viable future, he said. For what? 14 clinics that lose money, contracts to communities that will never generate meaningful returns? Helen would have understood. Helen built those clinics, James said. Every single one. She drove to Kenora and Dryden and Sioux Lookout, and she sat with the administrators and the nurses, and she asked them what they needed. And then she built a company that could give it to them. His voice was steady. Don't tell me what my wife would have understood. The room was very quiet. Bliss left without another word. Gordon followed, looking like a man walking underwater. Catherine waited until they were gone. Then she exhaled for what felt like the first time in 14 hours. The investigation that followed was methodical and ugly in the way these things always were. Federal fraud investigators, forensic accountants, depositions that lasted full days and left everyone involved feeling scraped out. James came to the office every day for 2 weeks. Nora came with him, setting up in a corner of Catherine's office with coloring books and her paperback and the stuffed moose, whose name Catherine eventually learned was Gerald. The 3 of them developed an accidental routine. James and Catherine reviewing documents at the desk, Nora periodically offering commentary on Gerald's opinions about corporate governance, which were apparently extensive and mostly concerned with whether there were snacks. She's remarkable, Catherine said one morning, watching Nora explain to Gerald why the forensic accountants were taking so long. She's her grandmother's, James said. Helen was exactly like that. Completely unintimidated by things that should have been intimidating. She once walked into a bank board meeting that had been running for 3 hours, sat down and said, I think we've been answering the wrong question. She was right. They started over. He paused. Nora does the same thing. Asks the question no one else thought to ask. Why didn't you come back sooner? James was quiet for a moment. Because when Helen died, I made her a promise. I promised her I'd raise Nora well. Present, consistent, available. She was 4 years old and she'd just lost her mother, and she needed a grandfather who showed up every day, not one who was always half somewhere else. He turned a page. I told myself I'd keep my distance from Hartwell, that I trusted the people Helen and I had hired. And for a while, I think I trusted them too much because it was easier than admitting I was too afraid to look. Afraid of what? Of coming back without her. His voice was matter-of-fact. The way people are matter-of-fact about things that have cost them enormously. This place was built with her. Every floor of it. Coming back without her felt like... He stopped. It felt like a lot. Catherine didn't say anything. She didn't think he needed her to. The charges came 6 weeks later. Gordon accepted a plea arrangement, returned a significant portion of the stolen funds, and agreed to testify against Bliss. Raymond Bliss fought every step of the way through 3 lawyers and 2 failed motions to suppress evidence, before his legal team finally negotiated a settlement that included substantial restitution, lifetime bars from financial leadership, and a plea on 2 counts of fraud. It wasn't prison. Catherine had wanted prison. Her lawyer told her this was the reality of corporate crime cases, settlements, restitution, bans. She said things in her office that she would not repeat in professional company, and then she moved on, because the alternative was letting Bliss occupy more of her time than he deserved. The company that came through the other side was smaller. The Crestbridge deal collapsed. The acquiring company withdrew when the fraud became public, which was either justice or simply the market working as advertised, depending on how you looked at it. 3 senior executives rose in the first month. Investor confidence dropped, then stabilized, then slowly, unevenly began to climb again as the story shifted from Hartwell in crisis to Hartwell in recovery. Catherine cut her own salary by 35%. She created a staff oversight committee with direct access to the board. She brought in external auditors on a quarterly rotation. She reinstated all 14 Northern Clinic contracts, personally calling each administrator to apologize for the notice they'd received and to confirm that the contracts would be honored. The call from Dryden in northwestern Ontario she remembered most clearly. The clinic administrator there was a woman named Ruth, who had been running the facility for 11 years. When Catherine told her the contract was reinstated, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've got a patient right now who drove 2 hours in the snow to see our doctor. She does it every month. If we'd closed, she'd have no options within 150 kilometers." A pause. "Thank you for calling." Catherine kept that conversation in her head on the hard days. There were many hard days. James came to her office on a Tuesday morning about 2 months after the board vote. Nora was at school. He sat down across from her desk without the manila envelope, without documents, without the particular focused tension he'd carried through the investigation. He just looked tired. Tired and under it, something that might have been relieved. "I'm going home," he said. Catherine looked up. "What?" "I'm resigning from my interim advisory role, going back to Sudbury. Nora's school play is in 3 weeks. She's playing a tree, which apparently requires significant preparation, and I've already missed enough of her life making sure this company was still standing. James, the organization is in good hands. Better than it was." He folded his hands on his desk. "I'm going to keep my shares. I'm going to be available by phone when you need a founder's perspective on something. But I'm not coming back to this building regularly. I didn't come back to reclaim a role. I came back to stop something that shouldn't have been allowed to happen. You saved this organization. You saved this organization. I gave you documents and you chose to use them when you didn't have to. You sent that email knowing what it would cost you." He paused. "That's not nothing, Catherine. That's everything, actually." She looked at the window. October had turned to November while she wasn't watching. Snow on the parking lot. The employees' signs were gone, replaced by ordinary Tuesday morning foot traffic, people who had somewhere to be. "Helen would have liked you," James said. Catherine's throat went tight. "You didn't have to say that. I know. I said it because it's true." He stood. "She would have liked the way you dug in, the way you refused to make it easy for yourself. The Northern Clinics, she built those because she believed the people in those communities deserved to be fought for. She'd be glad someone still agrees." He shook her hand at the door. It was the first time they'd shaken hands. "James," she stopped him. "What do you tell Nora about Hartwell? About what her grandmother built?" He thought about it. "I tell her that her grandmother believed that if you had the ability to help someone, the ability became an obligation. That it wasn't enough to mean well. You had to show up." He smiled, just slightly. "Nora takes it very literally. Last week she gave her lunch to a kid at school who forgot his, came home and told me she'd been obligated." Catherine laughed. "Take care of this place," he said. "She spent her whole life building it." He left before she could answer. 3 months later, a venture capital group reached out. Smaller than Crestbridge, more careful, genuinely interested in the community health model as a profitable and replicable framework. Catherine met with them 4 times before she trusted them enough to bring them to the board. The deal they negotiated was fair, explicit about program protections, and written in language so clear that even Gordon's replacement said there was nothing to hide in it. The stock recovered, not to where it had been, maybe not ever exactly to where it had been, but to something steadier, something that felt less like a number and more like a reflection of actual organizational health. Patricia, the nurse who had stood between the security guards and James that first morning, was appointed to the new staff oversight committee. She took the role with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who had been waiting a long time to be asked. On the day the Northern Clinic contracts were formally renewed and expanded, 12 new communities added to the original 14, Catherine organized a small gathering in the Hartwell lobby. Not a celebration, more like an acknowledgement, a recognition that something had almost been lost and wasn't. They unveiled a plaque beside the main entrance. A photograph of Helen Hartwell from the early days of the company, not the formal portrait that hung in the boardroom, but one someone had found in the archives, taken at the Dryden Clinic opening, Helen mid-law, her hair blown sideways by the northern wind. The inscription read, "She believed showing up was the beginning of everything." James came with Nora. She was taller than the last time Catherine had seen her, and the missing tooth had grown back. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "That's Gran," she said finally. "That's Gran," James agreed. "She looks happy." She was. She was very happy that day. Nora reached into her backpack and pulled out a drawing, careful crayon lines of a building with people standing outside it, under a banner that read Hartwell in large, slightly uneven letters, and underneath, smaller, "For everyone." She held it up to James. "Can we put this next to the picture?" James looked at Catherine. Catherine said, "We absolutely can." There was a small hook on the wall beside the plaque, as though someone had anticipated this exact moment. Nora hung the drawing herself, standing on her toes, adjusting it twice until it was straight. Then she stepped back, examined her work with the critical eye of someone who takes presentation seriously, and announced, "Gerald thinks it looks good." "Tell Gerald I agree," Catherine said. Nora considered this. "Gerald also wants to know if there are snacks at this event." There were, in fact, snacks. Catherine had specifically requested them. The rest of the afternoon passed the way good afternoons do, quietly, unremarkably, full of small conversations between people who had been through something difficult together and were trying to remember what normal felt like. James found Catherine by the window as people were leaving. "How's the board?" he asked. "Functional, getting better." She watched the last of the staff file toward the elevator. "Patricia is already keeping everyone honest. She sent the chair a 6-page memo about transparency protocols last week. Eleanor called me to say she'd never felt more supervised in her life." James smiled. "Good. Are you actually going to stay away? Call when needed? No regular involvement? That's the plan. And if the plan changes, then I'll call you first." He pulled on his coat, a different one, she noticed. Still practical, still Canadian in the particular way that prioritized warmth over appearance, but newer, less worn. Nora's class is doing a unit on community helpers next month. Her teacher asked if anyone's parents or grandparents might want to come in. And she told her teacher her grandfather's friend runs a hospital and helps people who can't afford to be sick. Catherine looked at him. "I thought you should know that's your job description, according to a 9-year-old. James picked up his bag. "She also said you make good decisions, but you work too much and someone should probably tell you to go home earlier. She's not wrong. She rarely is." He nodded once, the simple nod of someone who has said what they came to say. "Take care of it, Catherine. All of it." She watched him cross the lobby, Nora appearing from somewhere near the snack table with Gerald under one arm and a shortbread cookie in the other hand, falling into step beside him, telling him something with animated seriousness that made him laugh. They went through the front doors and out into the November afternoon, and Catherine stood at the window and watched them go. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ruth in Dryden, clinic expansion approved by Regional Health Board today. 12 new appointment slots per week. Thank you for not giving up on us. She read it twice. Then she closed her laptop, turned off her office light, and went home before dark for the first time in longer than she could remember. Some things, it turned out, were worth every difficult moment it had taken to protect them. And sometimes the proof of that arrived in a text from a clinic in northwestern Ontario, and in a crayon drawing on a lobby wall, and in a little girl who believed, with complete and uncomplicated certainty, that showing up was where everything began.